Well, here we are, still on the road to World War II. Our next milestone marker is 1937. From 1937 to 1939, the Axis powers, which we'll talk more about in a few more slides, are moving more and more towards what will eventually become the Second World War. Japan attacks China in 1937. So in 1937, the Japanese just outright attacked China. There's like a manufactured incident to justify sending in troops, and whereas they had gone into Manchuria in 1931, that was largely not actually open warfare. I mean, a little skirmisher here, but this is just outright Katie bar the door. It's on. Okay, the Japanese invade China. Here's a famous picture, Chinese baby in Shanghai. You can tell there's a railroad track there. Something's blown up. The kid's upset, probably wondering where mom is. These kind of pictures get out, and certainly people are horrified by this kind of thing. This is sometimes called the rape of Nanking. Lots of civilians died in this thing. Okay? And certainly people aren't happy about it. They see these pictures, but what it really boils down to is, hey, these are Asians killing other Asians, and it's really none of our business. Okay, it's half a world away. We've got our own problems. We're fighting the Great Depression, and so Americans just aren't that interested in trying to intercede. Oh, we can fire off the typewriter and type off a nasty note to the Japanese and start trying to put pressure on them, but there's really nothing we can do to get them to stop their war in China. Okay? Now, under the Neutrality Act, we're not supposed to sell goods, military goods, or aid to countries at war, but apparently they never actually bothered to declare war. So Roosevelt, I get those two confused all the time. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States, doesn't have to invoke the Neutrality Act. He'll try to find ways to get aid to the Chinese. Okay? Now, one of the things he does is actually comes a little bit later. It's a little bit out of place on the PowerPoint, and sometimes I just skip over it, but then it turns out it's like on the end of course review test for the 11th grade end of course test, but now you don't have to take it. But I'm going to go ahead and mention it anyway because the slide is there. One of the things Roosevelt will do, and see, this is actually a little out of the time frame from 1937. But I told you, but it's a great example that he's trying to get aid to the Chinese. One of the things we come up with is the existence of the American Volunteer Group. Next slide. All right. These men on the left are pilots for the American Volunteer Group. They're members of the Army, Air Force, the Navy, and the Marines. They're allowed to resign their commissions as officers and sign up to fight for China in the Chinese Air Force against the Japanese invaders. Okay? These men become known as the Flying Tigers. It's a very famous group. Okay? Flying Tigers. Okay? They're basically mercenaries, right? I mean, they're Americans in China. They're not Chinese, but they're fighting against the Japanese, and they're getting paid. So technically, they're mercenaries. This is an example of one of the things Roosevelt's trying to do to get aid to the Chinese, because the Chinese don't have a lot of trained pilots. And then these pilots, there was kind of an understanding when they signed their release forms to leave the military, that when they were done in China, they could come back, rejoin the American military, and not be punished with loss of seniority or count years towards retirement. So this whole thing's kind of a semi-covert, under the counter operation, trying to get aid to the Chinese. Now, really, the American Volunteer Group is terribly misunderstood. A lot of people think that they were seeing. If you went and stopped somebody in the street, said true, false, the Flying Tigers saw combat prior to Pearl Harbor, most of the people would probably look at you and go, who? But if they did know who the Flying Tigers were, they would probably say, oh yeah, they were fighting the Japanese long before Pearl Harbor. That's not true. They really didn't. But they were formed before that. And they were in China, and they were working up, they were assembling the airplanes, they were building the air bases. If Pearl Harbor did not eventually come along, they would have been in combat against the Japanese probably by 1942. So see, we're a little out of the time frame here of Japan attacking China in 1937. So the guy who put the slides together, really this should have gone later. This is where he put it, and it is an example of Roosevelt trying to find ways to help the Chinese. Just as a trivial note here, so the Flying Tigers fly these Curtiss P-40 aircraft. Okay, that was an American fighter design that was we had sold some to the British, and then the British agreed to release some to the Flying Tigers, if I recall. It was kind of a roundabout route. They painted these shark tooth artwork on their airplanes, trying to help scare the Japanese. Okay, tiger sharks. This is a pretty popular motif on aircraft, and so what happens a lot, anytime anyone sees a picture of a Curtiss P-40, Curtiss is a manufacturer, with these tiger markings, people tend to go, oh, look, it's a flying tiger. But a genuine American volunteer group aircraft, or a picture of a genuine aircraft, will be distinctive because they'll have Chinese Air Force markings. Okay? It's hard to see here, but trust me, that's a Chinese Air Force marking. Okay? So you will see American P-40s with these tiger shark markings later in the war, sometimes flown by former members of the American Volunteer Group, but with the American marquees. Well, technically they're not flying tigers, but all right. Anyway, that's minutia. Let's get on with it, shall we? Roosevelt, I says, trying to find ways to help the Chinese. He will give a speech called the Quarantine Speech in Chicago. In it, he suggests that aggressor countries, like things that are going on, like in Italy, with Ethiopia, or Japan against China, should be quarantined, okay? Sealed off, treated as pariahs. People shouldn't do trade with them, and put pressure on them to straighten up and play nice by being cut off from trade and other things. Okay? This might have been like a trial balloon. Send up, see if anyone's interested. What Roosevelt's going to find is there's not a lot of public support. People certainly might have sympathy for the Chinese, but remember, we're still in a Great Depression. Now, it's much better than it was in 1928, but we have a lot of problems here at home, and there's not a lot of people who are going to be anxious to risk starting something with Japan, trying to protect China. We got unemployment here at home we need to worry about. And so Roosevelt's proposal for a quarantine speech doesn't really gather a lot of support. I'm sorry, his quarantine speech with a proposal for quarantine. It just doesn't get a lot of public support. Now, further proof that Americans aren't interested in getting involved in overseas affairs comes with, I've always said, the Panay incident. Slide. But I was watching a video today, and they called it the Panay. So I've always said Panay, but this fellow on the narration said Panay. So maybe I've been wrong. However, the same narrator also, instead of saying ensign, said ensign. So I'm not convinced that he can't pronounce ensign, that he actually is pronouncing Panay right. So I think I'll just say Panay because that's what I've always said. But anyway, maybe I'm wrong. At the end, it doesn't matter. What's important is what happened. So this formidable-looking warship is USS Panay. It's a United States Navy ship. It's not a particularly impressive one. It's a river gunboat. It patrols up and down the Yangtze River in China, looking out for American interests. Okay, it's a gunboat. It does have armament on board. I mean, it is run by the U.S. Navy, but it's a river gunboat. Okay? And it's off during this problem with Nanking, it was looking out, trying to make sure to evacuate Americans in the area, protect American interests, protect Standard Oil cargo tankers, etc. And the Panay comes under attack, okay, by Japanese aircraft, okay? And the Panay is sank. Okay? There are some casualties, nothing huge, but some people are killed, some people are wounded, and U.S. Navy warship has gone under. Okay, and we're not at war with Japan. Okay? Now, you'd think, could this be enough to trigger some kind of massive upswell of support in the American people? I mean, think about it. What did we do to Spain in 1898 when we merely suspected that they sank the USS Maine? It was the hell with Spain. Remember the Maine. All right? But now it's like, it's Panay or Panay. It's a little river gunboat. Do you really want to go to war over this rust bucket? And so, the Japanese apologize. They say, oh, it was a mistake. We didn't mean to do that. It was mistaken identity, blah, blah, blah. I know they apologize. They might have paid us some money. I don't know. It's not important. But it just goes to show that, it's an international incident, but it's not the kind of thing that people are willing to go to war over. Okay? Now, before I recorded this, the next slide here, next photo here, says survivors of the Panay, and see the video, the photo's gotten corrupted. So I went out to try to refine the photo and restore it. I didn't find this particular photo, but I went to Wikipedia because the guy who did the PowerPoint originally got a lot of the photos off of Wikipedia, which is a great place to get photos when you're in a hurry. There was a video embedded on the Wikipedia page about the sinking of the Panay, or the Panay. It was, so if you're curious, it was pretty long. It was about 20 minutes. I watched it. Okay? But if you'd like to see, this is one thing we don't have in the first half of the class is video. Okay, we just have paintings and pictures. If you go to the Wikipedia page for the USS Panay and scroll down, there is a little newsreel report showing the attack on the ship and some of the fighting and some of the aftermath. So if you're interested, you could go look for that. I thought it was pretty interesting, but I'm a history geek. I'm going to find it interesting. Maybe you wouldn't, but there may be one or two or three or four of you out there who'd like to see some actual videos, so you might go to Wiki and look that up. And we're hitting the time slot here, so we'll call this video to a halt and get ready to hop back to Europe for more fun with Adolf Hitler.